So, upcoming, we have a unit test. We just finished Unit 1. We have the last quiz coming up and our final summative project for that. The change machine we're working on. The unit test will be coming up. I'm looking at next week, after we come back, as a possibility. If not that Friday when we come back, then maybe the beginning of the following week. So just be prepared for that in your thinking while you're taking the long break. Kind of look at your material, look at the review. There is some review material at the unit level for you to look at as you're going through this stuff. But we're going to start the next lesson before we do any unit test review, so that way we're closer to the unit test. Fair enough? So today, this is the beginning of Unit 2, Module 1, Lesson 1. The first thing we're going to talk about is simple if statements. Now, these statements can get much more complicated. We're going to talk about them on the most basic level. Hang on. So we're going to talk about them on the most basic level, step by step. The syntax of the if statements in Java are very similar to the syntax of if statements in several other languages. So really, this is a very important statement to learn. This is very universal across all languages. The concepts behind it is universal across all languages. An if statement in every language behaves exactly the same way. The way they write it is a little different, but like I said, in Java, there's a lot of similarities to C and C# and even some ASP code and things like that. So there's a lot of similarities in all of that. PHP. So what is a simple if? Well, this is what a simple if looks like. So we have a question here where we're getting the next int, which, by the way, we found out that scan.next works as well, but it works in kind of interesting ways. So you might want to experiment with that, but you can use it. It just does not work the way we've looked at all the other integers. So I would stick with using next int. And we're going to say if the number of wheels equals 2. So this is our first true comparison. Whenever you're comparing things in Java, there's always two operators. So we have an equals to compare the equality of two things. We can also do a greater than or equal to, a less than or equal to, and we can do a less than all by itself and a greater than symbol all by itself. So if you want to talk about something being compared to, you have to use the equals. I guarantee you that half of you will still use a single equals, and you'll come to me and say, Mr. McLaughlin, I don't know what's wrong with my program. It's doing weird stuff. And I'll say, you forgot the equals. I guarantee it. It's one of those mistakes that just kind of plagues people. So be really aware of this. This is a big deal that you have to pay really close attention to. Equals is a comparison. A single equal sign is an assignment. So if I said number of wheels and used a single equal sign here, the way Java interprets that is it does the assignment. It will make number of wheels assigned the value of 2, and then it won't give you an error. It'll say true. Yes, I did that. I assigned it the value of 2. Yay me. It won't throw an error. You would think it'd say, whoa, you can't do that. Nope. Java said, fine, if you want to assign a value inside of a variable and you want to confirm that I did that, absolutely, I'll do that for you. Yes, it's true. The problem is, it's always true at that point. That's always a true statement when you do an assignment. Universally true. X equals 5, assigned, done, true. So the mistake that you'll find is that it's a logical mistake. The code will run, there'll be no compiler error. In fact, if you don't run enough test cases, you may not even notice it. So this is a very tricky mistake to find. It will plague you when you're debugging your code and trying to find the error, and it could be very simple. You used one equal sign rather than two. So be very careful of that. The system.out.println, it's a scooter, is the result that happens when this comparison is true. Java has Boolean, true, and false. That's the word we use for true and false. It's called a Boolean. If this condition is true, then it will print this statement. Notice where the semicolon falls. It's at the end of the statement. There is no semicolon here. In fact, these two things could be on the same line of code. That's stylistically not acceptable, but when you're trying to shrink the size of code and eliminate spaces and make file size smaller, you can have this up on the same line as this command. That's fine. It's actually one complete command. The command ends at the semicolon. So if you type in how many, if you answer the question with a 2, we get a scooter. If we answer the question with a 4, we get nothing. Because there's nothing that happens after that condition. Diving back in. So an if statement has the following syntax. This is a simple if statement. There are much more complicated if statements than this, and we're going to look at those in the next couple lessons. But a simple if statement starts with a condition in parentheses. The condition, the test, the comparison, whatever you want to call it, must be in parentheses. If you're doing a comparison of equality, one of the ways to do that is with an equals equals. This equals equals method is going to work fine for us to start, but it only works for primitives. Let me say that again. Equals equals only works, and I should put it this way, as expected with primitives. The one exception to that is strings. Even though strings is technically an object, equals equals can be used with strings. I try to avoid it anyway because there's much better ways of handling strings. System.out.println is the result of this condition if it is true. And again, notice we use the equals equals comparison instead of the assignment of the equal sign. So if there's more than one statement that we want to accomplish, we have to use curly brackets and set up a block of code. So we can have one line if statements where there's one statement to accomplish, and we have multiple line if statements. The multiple line if statements require the brackets as a block of code. The if statement can be thought of as a gate or a switch. And once that switch is flipped, we can go to those statements. If the switch is not flipped, we bypass those statements, much like the electricity in a switch in an electrical circuit. If the switch is open, the electricity flows through whatever the switch goes to, maybe a light. If the switch is closed, then the electricity bypasses that, and the current is not, circuit is not completed. So this is the way you would group several statements together. We'd still have our if and our comparison. Then we have a curly bracket. Now the placement of the curly bracket really doesn't matter. Again, Java doesn't care about white space. It doesn't care about spacing. We can put the curly bracket here. We could put the curly bracket on a separate line all by itself. You could put the curly bracket in front of the first statement there. Stylistically, we put the curly bracket after the parenthesis. That's where people would expect to find it. And if you get in the habit of doing the same thing all the time, when you accidentally forget a curly bracket, you'll know where to look to see if it's there. Because you'll get an error, and the error might be weird about an unclosed statement, but it might be referring to a statement that's above, because technically, if you leave this off, this closes what is ever above this. So brackets can be tricky in that Java can only interpret what it sees. It can't interpret your intention. If it sees a closing bracket in a location that it doesn't expect, it's just going to assume it's closing some larger block of code, which could be your entire class. It could be that it could recognize this as the final curly Q of the class, and then you'll have a final curly Q of the class after that, and your program will say unexpected close of class, or essentially you have an extra curly bracket. But really you don't have an extra one, you're missing one. So the interpretation of the errors that Java presents you with brackets can be very tricky. What I like to do, as soon as I write an if statement that I know is going to have multiple statements, I put in both curly brackets before I even start the statements. So I'll write if, I'll put the condition, I'll put curly bracket, and then I'll come down here and put curly bracket, knowing that I'm going to put in multiple statements. Keeps you honest, keeps you from making that mistake of forgetting that curly bracket at the end. The other thing I do is if it's a complicated condition, I'll just put in both parentheses right away before I even type in the condition. So the way I write an if statement to start will be if, parenthesis, parenthesis, curly bracket, curly bracket. That's how I start coding an if statement. Do all of that first, then I go back in and fill in my condition, then I go back in and fill in my statements. It'll keep you from making mistakes. It's a really good stylistic thing to do. Java doesn't care if you do it or not. It's just stylistically it's going to make it easier. So what I would like you guys to do is you try input a double and test if it is equal to 17.25.